Me and my mom recently finished watching Hell's Kitchen Season 1. I'd seen this season a long time ago, and I remembered who won, but none of the other details really besides a few quotes. Since I'm living with my mom now and I have Amazon Prime, I decided to share one of my favorite shows with her. I love the show because I love Gordon Ramsay. He's hilarious. His accent, his insults, his over-the-top reactions to everything. What's not to love? I also love reality shows and competition shows. This is both. It's got drama, it's got funny moments, and it's got real people reacting to real situations, which is usually better than that scripted bullshit. In this post, I'm going to go over some of the highlights of the first season, the funny moments, and the things that stuck in my mind. Episode 1. During the Signature Dish Challenge in the first episode of the first season, a guy named Andrew makes a dish he calls Andrew's Absolute Penne, and Chef Ramsay spits it out and calls it absolute dog shit. Andrew then tells the chef he's been cooking for 10 years, and the chef says, "What a waste of 10 years." Then a guy named Dewberry comes up and Chef Ramsay mishears him and thinks his name is Blueberry. He's made an overcooked baked spaghetti that Ramsay calls children's food, and some dramatic music plays when Chef Ramsay lifts the spaghetti off the plate with a fork. Next, an executive chef named Chris comes up and explains that his dish is salmon roasted on a plank of cedar. Chef Ramsay says to him, "I think you're a plank," to which Chris responds, "I don't really know what that means, chef," to which Ramsay responds, "A plank means an idiot." After the challenge and before dinner service, Chef Ramsay explains that he wants to see no panic, no wimps, no tears, no blood, just pure concentration. Then 2 minutes later, the chef complains that he has called out the first ticket, the big excitement, and that they have just stood there like 5 wimps, 5 bloody wimps. During dinner service, one of the tables gets restless waiting for food, and 2 of the diners go right up to Chef Ramsay at the hot plate, and he tells the contestants to ignore the bimbos. They then leave, and Ramsay says, "Do you get it? Service and standards are far more important than some fucking bimbo." The ladies then come back up and say to the chef that he's hurt their feelings. Chef then says to Jean-Philippe, the maitre d', "Could you please escort these ladies back to plastic surgery?" Hottest chick, the winner. In my books of the hottest chick from season 1 is Mary Ellen. Although there weren't really any hot chicks this season, I'd say she's only about a 7 out of 10. Episode 2. During the second night's dinner service, some guy comes up to the kitchen and Ramsay tells him they're 7 tables behind. So the guy says, "That doesn't do much for me," to which Ramsay responds, "You do fuck all for me either." Then a couple comes up to the kitchen and Ramsay tells them to fuck off. Next, some of the customers order a pizza and it arrives. Jean-Philippe then disrespects one of those customers by saying, "I wish your education could be as good as your voice." The customer then pokes Jean-Philippe in the chest, and Chef Ramsay shuts down the kitchens, complaining that his maitre d' was assaulted. Episode 3. In this episode, Jeff starts to break down. He asks Chris, "What do you have on my ass today?" Chris then starts to respond, but Jeff keeps interrupting him, so he tells Jeff to shut the fuck up and to let him finish his sentence. Jeff then gets up and yells, "Don't fucking talk to me that way." Next, at dinner service, Jeff screws up and starts yelling about how he's never been on a fucking line before. Chef Ramsay then turns to the blue kitchen and asks Wendy why the spaghetti isn't in the water yet. Wendy responds that the water's not boiling, and Ramsay asks if she topped it off with cold water. She says yes and explains that she thought cold water was supposed to boil faster than hot water. In the red kitchen, Chef Ramsay and Jeff have been arguing, and the chef asks him if he wants to quit. He says no, because he's not a quitter, and the chef responds that he's not a cook either. Jeff then says, "You're an asshole," and walks off the show. Episode 4. The red team finishes serving all their diners, and Chef Ramsay tells Jimmy to start dancing like a ballerina. Episode 5. In this episode, they have a pasta making contest, and for each team, one member has to volunteer to have the pasta placed on their arms and heads. In the red team, Jimmy is the volunteer. They put spaghetti on his head, and Chef Ramsay says, "Jimmy, you look fucking delicious as a blonde." The red team then wins the contest, and later that night, Michael tells Chris, "You've got a friend in me," and tucks him into bed. He then goes outside and starts talking to himself and to Chef Ramsay's picture on the billboard, which the voiceover guy says is a nightly ritual of his. He says to himself, Michael hasn't been Michael since day one, and he talks about his manipulative plans to beat the other contestants. Then, during dinner service, Jimmy keeps leaving fingerprints on the soup bowls, and Ramsay says, "It's not possible," and "Oh no, dirty bowl." During this dinner service, one team has to cook while the other team serves. When it's the red team's turn to serve, Michael decides to sabotage the blue kitchen by getting his team to recommend the lasagna, which they're running low on and which is a pain to make. Jimmy then begins to sweat profusely, and he keeps trying to wipe it up, so Jean-Philippe tells him to stop touching himself. At the end of the night, the red team loses dinner service, and Michael is chosen to nominate 2 people for elimination. He chooses Elsie and Chris, the 2 strongest chefs, when it was clearly Jimmy who should have been going home. This is after he had just got done saying to Chris that he's a friend and not an enemy. Chris is betrayed and is sent home early. Episode 6. With only 15 minutes left in the dinner service, and the blue team backed up with orders, something in the dining room catches Ralph's eye. A girl sitting at the table waves to Ralph, and he waves back and smiles, and Chef Ramsay was not happy about it. He says, "Ralph, I know we're in Hollywood, but you're here to cook, not flirt." Episode 7. Jimmy has become known as Dirty Bowl Jimmy, and Chef Ramsay comments on Michael's dish, saying that, presentation-wise, it looked like Jimmy's plate, dirty. During dinner service, Michael hides a tray of fillets to sabotage Jessica. She's in an argument with Chef Ramsay when all of a sudden Michael goes to his hiding spot and comes back with the steaks. The voiceover guy says, Michael's mysteriously solved the case of the missing meat. He's talking to himself. He's nominating the best instead of the worst, and he's hiding steaks. I'd say he's a pretty strange character, this Michael. Meanwhile, Jimmy keeps screwing up. He pours fish stock on a risotto, and later Chef Ramsay asks him, "Why isn't the fish in the pan?" To which Jimmy responds, "I'm trying to fucking do both at the same time." Ramsay then says, "Come here, you," and Jimmy yells, "No." Chef Ramsay then shuts down the kitchens, and Jimmy finally gets sent home. Episode 8. Jessica serves Chef Ramsay a dish he says looks like Dewberry's dog's dinner. Hot chick in the dining room. A blonde who looks to be at least an 8, possibly a 9, enjoys the food. Episode 9. Ralph finally wins another challenge after losing all but one, and his big reward is he gets to choose what meat he gets to cook for dinner service. During dinner service, the contestants' families show up, and Ralph's fiancée catches my eye for some reason. Episode 10. Now, at long last, it's the final episode, and Ralph and Michael are the only contestants left. Michael, who hadn't said anything to any of his team yet, all of a sudden puts his head down and turns around to them and says, "You guys cook like old people fuck." Meanwhile, Ralph keeps calling Jean-Philippe Jean-Pierre, and JP gets fed up and says in his funny Belgian accent, "If you call me one more time Jean-Pierre, I'm gonna kill you." They then pick teams, and Michael ends up with 3 of the top 5 contestants, and Ralph ends up with none of the top 5 contestants. I could tell then that one of the teams was clearly stronger than the other. During dinner service, Dewberry, who is on Ralph's team, gets so hot he almost faints, but he comes back and Ralph says to him, "You are a rock today, aren't you, Dewberry?" To which Dewberry responds, "I'd rather you be saying I was Brad Pitt's wife." In the end, it's the weird guy Michael who wins his own restaurant, and I was annoyed by this because I wanted Ralph to win. He seemed like the nicer guy of the two, and his woman had the bigger boobs.